Hey, all you spooky babies. This is Aubrey from the Grimoire of Horror, and today I am happy to bring you a very special discussion with our own writers about our favorite comfort horror films. I'll introduce you to the group in just a minute, but first I want to talk a bit about the theme for this evening. Comfort horror films. Does this have you confused? Comfort films or comfort shows are something most people are familiar with. Having a bad day? Throw on The Princess Bride or an episode of The Office, and it never fails to pick up your mood, right? Well, for some of us, horror is where we find this type of comfort. I have to start by giving a shout out to Ben Scrivens, who's the owner of Fright Rags, for giving me the food for thought that led to this panel. During my interview with him, I asked, if you woke up in any horror movie setting, what would you choose? It was a goofy question intended to elicit an answer like, in the Chucky movies, because I'd love to punt that little jerk across the room. But the answer I got surprised me. Haddonfield, Illinois, the setting of the Halloween franchise. What was more surprising was how Ben answered this question with the same gleeful wistfulness of, say, a Star Wars fan saying they'd love to wake up on Millennium Falcon. Really? The setting of fictional countless murders? Yet Ben's love for the Halloween franchise is so deep that the thought of waking up there brought a smile to his face. It begs to ask the question, what brings us to horror, and how does horror bring us joy? For many, it's the adrenaline found in the highs and lows. For others, it's the catharsis of riding the intense roller coaster. And for some, it may be exploring intense emotions or taboo topics not found in other cinema. Yet, what brings us back to the same horror movie or movies over and over again? For help exploring this idea, I turn to my fellow writers at the Grimoire of Horror. Jim?
There's Scott.
Quinn?
Hey there.
And Adam?
Greetings.
How's everyone doing today?
Doing
Yeah,
well.
good.
Yeah.
Glad to be here.
Excited.
So for this video, we each chose two films that we considered our comfort horror films. And we're going to go through and talk about them. And I guess actually to start, I'm going to turn to Adam. And actually, Adam, if you could tell me, when we say the term comfort films or comfort horror films specifically, like, what does that mean to you?
To me, it's something you can just kind of pop on at any time and still enjoy, even though you've seen it multiple times. I think the reasons are various, but it's just that kind of media you can consume again and again. And even though you know what's happening, it's still something that you can find enjoyment in and escapism in. So that to me is kind of what I was thinking when I was looking at my comfort films.
And for Quinn, is it about the same for you, or is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Your last point earlier when you were describing them, definitely that relatable emotion span. As someone with anxiety, getting to test my adrenaline system and experience a lot of the things going on in horror without putting myself in any danger at all, not having to do heights, not having to do roller coasters, not being daring in any way, but still feeling those emotions. And especially with newer horror, there is a lot more drama and their family values or, different things to experience throughout horror that I feel like it tests a lot more of our ability to feel stress, anxiety, horror, tense relationships, and different things throughout, not just being scared, but in a very safe way where at the end it gets wrapped up, there's a resolution, and you can click it off and it's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the same for me as far as anxiety goes, because if my anxiety is going, it's toiling over stuff I can't do anything about, which is the nature of anxiety. So if I sit down and watch a horror film, it has something to chew on, something that actually affects my life. And it's hard to explain to people who don't experience that. It's a very enjoyable, relaxing experience. Even the most gruesome horror movies can be very calming and comforting because of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Jim, how about you? How do you feel about the term comfort horror films, and what does that mean to you?
I mean, it's not a very used term, but it's a good way to describe something that is it's familiarity. It's something that you know well and are happy to go back to each time. It's like a family member, something that you can rekindle with, and just brings back old memories, even though it's the same thing being shown to you each time.
Mhm.
That's a good
Absolutely.
point.
A very bloody, awkward family member.
Very much so, yes.
Yeah, we all have one. So to kick things off, like I mentioned, we each picked two films to discuss, and we're going to go through the list and then back up, each talking about one at a time, and kind of getting into why these films brought us comfort. So Adam, to start, what's one of your comfort horror films?
My first choice, I went with Frankenhooker by Frank Henenlotter, which was released in 1990. So it is one of those films that just kind of made it into my regular Halloween rotation. There's a few that I could have easily put here along with it. Like I'll watch The Brood almost every year and The Thing almost every year. But Frankenhooker is just kind of the one I went to where it's kind of tied to the season for me, just out of having watched it so many times. So I've probably seen it at least 24 times over the years, because I saw it when I was pretty young. And for me, it just kind of embraces everything I love about cinema. I love how crass the humor is. I love like it's horror, it's exploitation, it has good effects. So it's kind of indulging in the things that I liked as a kid that first kind of drew me into horror. It certainly helps that it takes place at 42nd Street as well, with a lot of it, which is always kind of summons this weird, the pseudo nostalgia that people can sometimes get. Like I wasn't there, but it seemed cool, and it seemed like a lot of cool stuff came out of there. So
Yeah, I get that completely.
yeah,
I miss an era that I was not a part of.
yeah. So just kind of being teleported into that area, and the film itself, I just find to be extremely fun and really appeal to my sense of humor. And I'm going to start off with a quote here, which I really love from the film, that sums it up why it works so well for me. Jeffrey, for those who don't know, Jeffrey ends up is the main character in this, and one day he accidentally kills his wife with a lawnmower that he ends up building, which kind of puts him into this deep depression where he decides he's going to figure out a way to rebuild her. It's the way he approaches it really wacky. I love the scenes where he's drilling into his own head to help him kind of come up with the proper thoughts. But early in the film, he has this wonderful conversation with his mom where his mom just says, "Oh, Jeffrey, I'm so worried about you." And he replies, "Yeah, well, so am I, Ma. Something's happened to me that I just don't understand. I can't think straight anymore. It's like my reasoning is all twisted and distorted, I seem to be dissociating myself from reality more and more each day. I'm antisocial. I'm becoming dangerously amoral. I've lost the ability to distinguish between right from wrong, good from bad. I'm scared, Ma. I mean, I feel like I'm plunging headfirst into some kind of black void of sheer and utter madness or something." To which his mom just replies, "You want a sandwich?" So it's kind of that, like, me, it perfectly appeals to my own dark sense of humor.
That's a response.
Yeah, there's another scene that I love, that I actually, one thing I find interesting about comfort films too is the more you come back to them, the more you pick up on stuff,
Yeah.
which I always find fascinating. And I know I didn't pick up on it for the first few times, but there's a scene where he goes to and gets a bunch of prostitutes because he's going to measure them up for the Frankenhooker he's planning on building. But during the scene, at the point where they find his super crack, and they're kind of like going through all of his stuff.
Did you say super crack?
Yeah,
Super
please
crack,
go
yeah.
back.
It is.
Okay, yeah.
He does actually call it super crack, because it makes you explode if you do it, which is amazing to watch in the film.
Wow.
But
has an allure to it.
yeah, there's this scene where he has a bunch of prostitutes, and he's kind of backpedaling a bit. He's like, I don't know if I want to kill all these people. And then they end up finding his drugs and going through it. And during this whole time, there's this rock song playing, and I never really picked up on the lyrics the first few times. But on later watches, it's a song obviously made for the film, and it's like this really cheesy rock song, but the lyrics are like saying like, don't do drugs, drugs are bad, don't have sex. So I think there's certain things about comfort films that as you watch more of them, you pick up on certain things that you didn't before, and certain things that weren't funny the first time might be hilarious the next time. Certain things that didn't shock you first time might shock you another time. So yeah, for me, like I don't think Frankenhooker is necessarily a unique film, but I think sometimes we just kind of pick comfort films to go with, and that's kind of the one that I find always just gets me really happy and really celebrating everything about being kind of a horror nerd.
Yeah, and how old again were you when you first saw this?
I would want to say like early 20s, so like I'm 35 now, so like decade and a bit ago. And since then, it's been almost every Halloween, every once in a while, kind of a mid-year watch as well too.
Yeah. And so, Jim, what's your first comfort horror film?
Well, I didn't have any quotes prepared, so
Making us look
Thanks.
bad, Adam.
Yeah,
I was
thanks, Adam.
scrambling last
Don't
moment to
overachiever,
write
Adam.
stuff down. I really love that quote so much. It makes
It's
me
a
laugh.
good one.
So I wanted to write it
Yeah.
down. So yeah.
the first comfort film I chose is I Drink Your Blood. It was released in 1970 and directed by David E. Durst. It was set around and released in the Satanic Panic, which I always found a very bizarre yet hilarious period of time for America, although it's happened across the world. A group of Satanist hippies break down in a near abandoned town. They harass the locals. They force feed an old man LSD, beat him quite severely. So his grandson uses tainted blood and poisons them. They proceed to get rabies and go on a murderous zombie-like rampage.
It has that grindhouse aesthetic as well to it, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a grindhouse film. The acting is subpar, to be kind. A lot of very bad special effects, but it's really earned a place in my heart. It's got some really, really bad music that plays quite sporadically, really bad acting, really over the top foaming of the mouth where it's to do with rabies.
And what is it about the movie that keeps bringing you back? Because you think when you hear those things in succession, bad acting, bad music, over the top foaming of the mouth, that's not something a lot of people would be like, I'm going to watch that again and again. So what is it about this film that brings you back each time?
Growing up, I had a tendency to lean towards films that had more of a 70s aesthetic, especially when it comes to horror films and, well, I guess B movies. I really enjoyed their unabashed approach to violence and the idea of more is better rather than quality. I Drink Your Blood's bad acting, its special effects, and the music really makes a unique charm that I really enjoy.
All right, and Quinn, what about you? What's your first one?
My first one is Trick or Treat. I have Sam stuff sprinkled all over my house. So I first watched it when I was around 20, and I've probably seen it about 30 times now. I can quote the entire movie. I love this movie. So I am a huge fan of Halloween in general, just the holiday. I will watch anything from foreign horror to preschool specials for Halloween. If it has something to do with Halloween, I will watch it. And I feel like we've had a lot of like murder movies and like frat party movies and things like that that are set on Halloween, but we haven't had that many that really celebrate the essence of the holiday. And I feel like Trick or Treat is one of those where it takes these different stories and interweaves them in such a way that you have vampires, you have werewolves, you have serial killers, you have slasher stuff. And it takes every part of the holiday and puts it together in such a way that I've shown it to a lot of people who don't like horror movies and they were scared by parts of it, but it's intriguing enough that they still found things to love. And so I feel like it's one of the few things that really embodies everything that I love about it, and there isn't much like it. And I really like different anthology type things that take different stories and weave them together. And the way that they all come near the end and the resolution, when you realize all these stories were connected, they're not just different plots it's jumping between. It's incredibly satisfying. And so I watch it at least twice a year, if not more. And I've insisted that everyone I'm close to watch it with me. I've read the comics. I've watched Krampus several times because there are just little universal connections. They take place in the same universe. But I really appreciate that there's something that fits that vibe, but it still has really cool, different, scary parts. And I'm also a big stickler for like rules and being a good girl and following all that. So like Sam is just like my guardian spirit. Like he is definitely like the one that protects this house because it is Halloween year round in here.
I was gonna say, it sounds like it's also a great movie to watch to get a quick hit of Halloween when you're in between holidays.
Yeah, I'm in phase 2 of my withdrawal.
I feel
Yeah.
like that film hits the perfect nostalgic spot of like what we viewed Halloween as a child as well too.
Exactly.
Like it kind of takes me back to how I envisioned Halloween when I was a kid.
Yeah, and it has a good amount of like scariness to it, but also like the costumes and the parties and like you said, that you get to miss. So it transports you back to, which makes me feel really nice because once you grow out of trick-or-treating, you don't get the same thing. Either you drink and party till you puke, or there's not as much to do on Halloween. But I feel like watching that kind of gives you that childhood and that Halloween festival back.
So do you guys think that you watch your comfort films like the most at certain times of the year? Like, is it something you would go back to? Because both Adam and Quinn, you mentioned Halloween as a regular watching. And the movie I was going to talk about, one of the two, is The Thing. And I typically try to bully anyone I'm hanging out with on Halloween into watching The Thing with me, on top of other yearly watchings for it. But like, is that something like a ritual? Like, do you have certain films you go back to every Halloween?
I don't really. I kind of keep things just how I feel. If I'm feeling a bit down, I'll probably throw on, I Drink Your Blood or my second film, which I will not reveal yet.
For me, it's mostly tied to Halloween, and especially where I live, where it gets extremely cold. I find I watch a lot of winter horror movies during winter. So I tend to watch The Thing kind of a bit after Halloween, along with the Brood, which I mentioned before were two others I was debating going with. But I think like the season and as well as special events like Halloween do kind of dictate more often when I'm feeling that nostalgia and want to indulge in something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I tend to watch mine more around Halloween, and then April 30th is Halloween or Walpurgisnacht. So I usually watch it for that because I need more Halloween in my life and I always celebrate that. So I watch it then, and then I'll often watch it when I'm down. It's a good pick me up too.
Talking about, The Thing, as you mentioned, Adam, and winter horror, I am also a huge fan of winter horror, and my first comfort film is The Thing. And it's a movie I try to bully anyone who's around on Halloween into watching with me, like I said before. And I think what draws me back to it is the fact, and this might sound pretentious, but I honestly believe it's as good as you're going to get to a perfect film, from beginning to end, between the characters, the people that were cast, the acting, the music that John Carpenter did himself, that just minimalistic, but it gets in your head. And I'm especially in love with the puppetry, because they chose to use the height of the puppetry at the time as opposed to computer graphics that were just coming out.
Yeah,
And
it's
I
a
mean,
smart pick.
yeah, absolutely. And it's funny when you see the other films that came out at the time, like Xanadu. And you're like,
Oh,
no,
they never hold up.
it's the
Never
right
hold
way.
up the same.
Yeah, and it's and I'm a huge fan of practical effects. So seeing that movie, it's horrifying. It never fails to just make me unbelievably uncomfortable, but not just because of the practical effects and like God, like monster creatures in that movie, but like the roller coaster you go on that feels so much closer to real life than any saccharine happy movie you can watch, which is like, who do you trust? And I was talking with a friend about this recently. Being a woman, when I walk into a room, that's exactly what life feels like. I'm like, any of these men could be monsters and I just don't know it yet. So the thing is just, it's a very enjoyable movie that explores the dark side like of humanity and dealing with other people in this kind of abstract way. But it's just, every time I watch it, there's something new I appreciate, like the framing of a shot, how it'll linger on creature, like I always am blown away that the spider creature, the longer you look at it, it's still terrifying. The part where the guy puts his hands through the chest and they get eaten, it
Favorite
never,
part.
yeah, never fails to get me. So that's definitely my go-to comfort film.
It for me, it fills a few of my favorite genres too, because like sci-fi horror and body horror,
Yeah.
and those are both that are also, when they're done well, they're very good, but they can also be done very badly, especially sci-fi horror. I feel like there's only a few that are really good, but I would echo the sentiments that I do think The Thing, like John Carpenter's The Thing, is a perfect film.
Yeah, there's so many different hidden layers to it as well. Are they Norwegian or are they Swedish?
They're Swedish,
initial.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. In Swedish, the guy running after the dog is saying, "Stay away from the dog. It's an alien." If you knew
Yeah.
Swedish, it would give away the film straight away. It's just such a great idea.
Oh, it's so perfect. And even if you spoke Swedish, like I feel like that just adds to it.
It would
And
be
I know,
confusing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think a movie that shows you, oh God, the more it shows you, the more it's terrifying. And I think the modern movie that reminds me of it is The Color Out of Space. Like, we're not discussing that today, but there's a scene where the longer you stare at something, the more uncomfortable it is. So it's a great movie to just constantly go back to. And to give my second film, and then we'll go back down the list just real briefly, my other comfort film, I love this film more than most things in life, and is Blood Diner. It is in the genre I would call of movies so bad they're good, but it's hard calling it a bad film, like crappy cinema, because it's just so clever. And I was absolutely delighted recently to find out it's a woman who directed it, Jackie. I forget exactly her name, but it's a movie. If you haven't seen it, it's two brothers using their uncle's head in a jar, who's giving them directions, are killing women and assembling their body to raise a multi-century old goddess called Sheetar. And it's wild. And it has kind of the same appeal of Frankenhooker, where it takes place in California in the 80s. I believe it's California. If not, it feels California, because they're running a vegan diner that feels very cultish. And there's just so many bonkers scenes in that movie. It's a movie I, again, try to get anybody I can to watch with me, and nobody has ever complained about it. It's crazy to me when you watch these, especially that era of like late 70s to early 90s, I think, horror movies that were just bonkers, like Frankenhooker, and of course, Basket Case is in that category, Maniac Cop, that they're just wild what they pack into it. And I would say Psycho Gorman, the new release, which very much captures that spirit. They're so wild, and they're like very aware of what they're making, and it's fun from beginning to end. And so every time I watch Blood Diner, it never fails to like crack me up. Like, how does this film exist? But yeah.
I remember bits and pieces of that I need to revisit. I remember the deep fried head. That's one of the gags, isn't it?
It's a hush puppy. A woman falls into the front. Yeah, they bring a woman back. It's like starts to become a sexy scene. So she's topless and running in her underwear. is trying to escape him and falls in the fryer. I forget exactly, I think, or he's the pusher, I can't even remember, because what follows overshadows it, which is she falls headfirst into the fryer, picks her head up, and her head has been replaced with a giant hush puppy, which if you're not from the South is like a fried piece of bread, and in a ball shape. And she is then, there's a topless woman in her underwear running around the diner with a hush puppy on her head. All right, so go back down through the order. Quinn, what's your second comfort film?
My second comfort film is A Haunting in Connecticut, and it came out in 2009. So one of the reasons I really love this film, it feels more like a landmark movie to me. I feel like right around that period was when a shift of horror happened. And with my friends, we kind of call it the transition of postmodern in horror films. So there were a lot of periods before where horror was starting to get kind of stale, in my opinion. I might be a little pretentious in this, but horror was starting to get a little more stale and predictable. A lot of the scores were getting more similar, and scares were pretty predictable, where your music would hype up right before something happened, and there was a certain pattern things were following. But when this weird transition occurred, a little bit before more political turmoil was happening, we're right on the precipice between modernism and postmodernism. So you still have that traditional values where like family values, drama, this faith in a deeper purpose, those things are still very present for modernism. But the postmodern part is that you really want to move away from a lot of those outdated tropes. So the types of scares being used are very different. That's when you started to see a lot of characters in the background of scenes. So they would show something when just a conversation is happening. There'd just be a character standing in the back corner of a dark room, and they wouldn't focus on it. There wouldn't be sound effects enhancing it. There would just be subtle, creepy things. And a lot of times there would be a delay in a scare where they would hype up the music. You think something's going to happen, characters looking under the bed, nothing happens, nothing happens, nothing happens. She goes in the next room and it happens then. So there's this playing with expectations where it's sort of flipping everything. So I feel like the style of scares was really subverting your expectations to make something that changed your psychological expectation. They also started using a lot more orchestral music around this time, which was common in horror films, but using calming music to do so instead of the high trills and violin chords and things like that. We didn't have as much discordant sound. Another thing I think they did really well was that it was a lot more subjective and feeling based. So instead of having a broader thing like a zombie apocalypse or a big disease or something affecting a large area, a town, the world, there were family matters. So you're moving into a haunted house and you need to get your son out who is dying. And that was sort of the plot in Haunting in Connecticut. They had a son who had cancer and he was a teenage boy, and they moved their family across into an area they really didn't want to be out in the country to move closer to his doctors. That caused a lot of strife within the family, and there was a lot of tension in the dramatic sense. So there was a lot of sort of hard to deal with, uncomfortable scenes initially, but not created from the horror sense. Like the ghosts don't come until later. You're initially just dealing with this family and their son who's dying. And so, the son is, or the father's trying to support two houses and, working on just one income. The mother can't work. She's trying to take the kid to all his doctor's appointments. And there's just all this tension there and fighting and yelling and things like that. And it really puts you in the shoes of being that kid whose parents are fighting. And so it already sets you so very on edge. You just want everything to be okay. You just want them to stop fighting. You just want to kind of hide in your room. So you have to deal with that before the ghosts come. And a lot of movies from this time have a sort of happier ending. They don't all flush out perfectly. There's often room for a sequel or like, dum, 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 the ghost isn't gone. But they do have a more wholesome aspect to them. So the characters really draw you in. And they did a great job with keeping everyone balanced. You don't ever feel the whole time like, oh, the dad is just an asshole. Like he's just the one fighting with the wife and he needs to just get off his soapbox. They balance everyone's perspectives really well. And I don't remember seeing that sort of dynamic writing in horror frequently. There were exceptions, but I feel like this movie was kind of the forerunner to things like The Conjuring and Insidious and that style of horror that we started to see. And that was where the turn came. So for that, I really respect it. And I really like the story of it. And so just being able to see that sort of change come about, I really like rewatching that.
So Jim, what's your second comfort horror film?
My second film may be a little bit controversial. It's Stacy: Attack of the Schoolgirl Zombies. Released in 2001 and directed by Naoki Tomomatsu. Stacy's more of a modern take on zombies, which is rare in Asian cinema. It's polar opposite to anything else in the genre, though. It revolves mostly around a love story. It involves bright colours, mostly filmed in the daytime, and cinematography has a real dream-like feel to it. When girls get to a certain age, they start to succumb to near-death happiness, and eventually die and reanimate as zombies.
And when you say more modern, you're thinking more like Romero, Night of the Living Dead type.
Yeah. Romero shuffling zombies, not infected, fast-running zombies that wouldn't make sense.
It has a lot of references to Western cinema in it as well, too. Like I always like you showed it to us somewhat recently, like we rewatched it together. But the one thing I remembered always was the Bruce Campbell chainsaw.
Yep.
But it has a lot of like nice odds.
For some reason it's called Blues Campbell's. I never realised until the last time we watched it. It's Blues Campbell's right hand. Yeah, it's full of fun little references. It really knew what it wanted to represent.
I'm curious when you first saw that one, because I feel Stacy's was one of the first like more extreme. Would you say it's an extreme film? Kind of borders on it.
Yeah, it does include parts of extreme cinema. I mean, it doesn't take too kindly to children, like most extreme cinema. It doesn't shy away from the violence. It's quite good with its special effects. It's mostly physical special effects. There's not really any. Actually, no, there is some CGI, but only where necessary. Like the blue sparkle powder. That would be a bit hard to do in real life.
Yeah, but I do feel I came across it like really early in my exploration of Japanese horror film, and I wonder if it's the same for you. Like, how far back do you recall first seeing it?
I think I was probably about 18 when I first saw it. It'd been out for a while, but yeah, just exploring pretty much any zombie film that I could find, because I was really obsessed with the genre as a teenager. Just the idea of it really intrigued me, not in a sociopathic way, obviously.
You haven't been trying to make your own T-virus?
No, not. I've been out of a lab in a long time. There's a reason I'm not allowed back in.
You say you were 18 when you watched it for the first time. Does it have a sense of nostalgia when you go back and watch it? Because I mean, I would say when you talk about the love story in the movie, I remember because I watched it with you guys, there is a sense of nostalgia in that movie and longing for someone that's, becomes something else. But like thinking about that, and like when you're 18 when you saw it, do you have a sense of nostalgia rewatching it?
It does have a level of nostalgia to me. I mean, maybe not as much as other films, but I mean, this is one that I definitely keep coming back to.
Yeah, absolutely. So Adam, what's your second comfort horror film?
I got a prop as well too, actually, on this one.
Hey.
So I think all of you did watch The Boy from Hell with me. I was very nervous because it's one of my all-time favorite films, but it is also an odd one. It kind of does relate back to Aubrey talking about Blood Diner, as it is a bad film. Like, there's no way around it, but it has its certain charm in the way that it delivers it. So
Mhm.
it definitely connects on that, just my love of like bad cinema that's also really endearing and creative. But beyond that, I think, and the point I wanted to make with this is I think sometimes comfort films can also relate to our loves of other media. Myself being really big into music, I really love musicals. None of them really fell under this category for this discussion, but in this case, it kind of ties it back to the manga of Hideshi Hino, which was the first horror mangaka that I really kind of fell in love with and made me just consume a lot of horror media. And I remember my first time reading Hino, the story that I read in it, he curses the reader within the first few chapters. He points, there's a little panel of him pointing and saying, "You will die within 3 weeks of reading this manga." And stuff like that just always kind of fills me with like a giddy joy. I don't know why, because it's like it's threatening, but it's also like so absurd that it kind of becomes humorous.
So did it come true?
No, I'm well.
okay.
It's been a lot. I've been around for much longer since I read it, but
Okay. Good to
and
know.
even this TV episode, the intro that they do to it does the same thing, where the narrator curses the viewer to the depths of hell.
I quite like
so-
the intro to the TV show. It's quite stylish, considering
Yeah.
it's nothing but Hideshi Hino.
Yeah, there is a scene too where the girl picks up a little toy from the rubble, and it's this guy. So, but I was trying to figure out how to talk about this as a comfort film, because I do sometimes find the idea of, because the film is very over indulgence in the sense of, I don't want to say it's mean spirited, because there's kind of a certain sense of absurdity, but a lot of Hino's work is very much in the realm of everything's just objectively awful. And for some reason, every once in a while within cinema, that's something that I like visiting, and I kind of like, because there's no expectations. It's just everything's bad, but it's kind of funny how everything's bad. And this film, I always find myself landing in that place, not just with the narrative, but with the way the film is executed as well. Because the story, for those who don't know, is a young kid ends up dying in the very beginning, and the mother ends up bringing it back, but it's a literal like baby from hell is the best way to describe it. Like, it actually goes back to hell and it takes people with it. And it's just a series of her murdering people to feed this baby, and then the baby bringing their souls back to hell. Like,
Motherhood, am I right?
yeah. Like there's nothing nice or kind about it in narrative wise, but it becomes so excess that it's absurd. And I often find comfort in films that just are willing to just be completely absurd and unapologetic. So yeah, it's kind of hard to navigate and explain, but it's something that I've always enjoyed, when films are willing to just push it so far to the point of absurdity.
Yeah, not a lot of films do it anymore. People play it too safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like they seem to also traverse well-trodden paths. Like, I remember we watched that movie with you, Adam, and like you said, it was one of the best nights during all of quarantine watching that movie and just rewatching one particular scene over, was it 3 times, and we just couldn't stop laughing, like, but not in the way that it was like something to be laughed at. It felt very much like laughing with, like, the way the effects were done, and how, it was like we were laughing at how absurd the scene was. And if I'm not mistaken, it's when the hell baby is like kicked across the scene.
Like rocketed into a lamppost, and it's that little ping that really makes it the moment he hits it. So those small details that count in bad
It
movies.
was done so well, like, and it's the guy in the suit that's running around as the hell baby, like, everything about it was just so well done and fun, like, that it's absurd, and it, you could say it's a bad movie and that it's not high gloss finished product, but that's what the charm in it and what brings you back.
Mhm.
And also makes it so unique at the same time.
There's like the scene where the kids are brought to the birthday party, and they just reveal the hell baby, and he's all like has the Hannibal Lecter mask, and he's all bound up, and the kids start to get really scared. It's like if you don't see it and just explain it, it sounds like something absolutely like horrific and horrible, but it's just the way it's executed, it becomes like this weird comedic piece almost,
Yeah.
as they're forced to sing happy birthday to like this nightmare of a creature. It's so well done.
Also, side note, the guy that plays the Hell Baby is also in it's the fourth guinea pig film, I believe, Android of Notre Dame.
Oh,
He's got a
nice.
main part in that. I watched that a little while ago and realised. Side note over.
Yeah.
Details matter.
Useless information that I've stored in my head brain.
Yeah. All right, so that's each of our two comfort horror films. We hope to hear from you, the viewer. If you have comfort horror films, tell us all about them. I know a lot of horror fans have those films they go back to over and over again, and it's an interesting phenomenon. I do believe there's a lot of science out there explaining why we like horror films as a genre, but not the phenomenon of like going back to the same ones over and over. So we'd love to hear from you. And my Grimoire writers, thank you so much for joining today. It was so much fun, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
No, thanks for organising this. This was a lot of
Thanks for
fun.
hosting it.
Yeah,
Thank
Great.
you.
yeah. Have a good night, everyone.
Night.
See you soon, bye.